Developer Success Portal screen. I wanted to start here at the outset and mention that we do have this developer portal, and it's at dev.scribesoft.com. And so all of the steps that I'm going to be taking today are described here. In fact, if I go to the documentation menu and look at the SDK, you see that there's a section here for fast messaging. And when I look at that, it gets me into all of the documentation that you would need to do all of this on your own. So if you're up for it and you want to try it out, please do visit our developer portal site and follow the steps. That way you don't have to write this all down. You can look at that later. All right. So before we get started, I want to just show you what tools I'm going to be using today. I will be using Microsoft Visual Studio, and I should say at the outset, I'm not a developer. As I said, my role at Scribe is product marketing, so I haven't really developed anything in many years, if not decades. So this is easy, right? I've just installed the free version of Microsoft Visual Studio 2017. And I'll show you the components that I needed to install to use the messaging framework. I've got the .NET desktop development installed, and then I've got the ASP.NET and web development. Those are the two components that I've installed in my very vanilla installation of Visual Studio. Okay, and we'll come back to this in just a minute here. I'll show you my web browser again. So I said at the outset that we were going to use Google Forms, and here I've created a form for Granite State Outfitters. If you've been through a trial of Scribe Online, you've probably seen this already. Granite State Outfitters is just a fictional outdoor products company that we like to use in our examples. And so here I've created a Google form that you can fill out to sign up for a newsletter. So if I want to say, hey, I'm interested in getting more information on products and promotions, I can fill this out. And the way Google Forms works, it takes the information that you submit and puts it into a spreadsheet, a Google Sheet. And this is what that Google Sheet looks like. And then, as I said, I've installed an add-on called Trigger and Send that takes the data that gets put into that spreadsheet and sends it out as a webhook. And you can see that that add-on is installed in my Chrome browser. Okay, and I've got that open right here. Now, the other tool that I'm going to be using in order to do this connector development is something called Request Bin. All it does is it receives an outgoing webhook, or an HTTP request really, and then it parses it and it shows you what the results are. So in order to create this connector, I really need to see what the JSON looks like in the outgoing webhook that this Trigger and Send plugin is going to send me. So I'm going to go ahead and create a request bin. It's going to give me a URL. I'll copy that, and then I'm going to paste that into the Trigger and Send configuration in my Google Sheet. So this is just a copy and paste. I'm going to say that I want to get trigger data on form submit, and then I'm going to say create the form submit event. And now it says that it's done that. Now when I go back and fill out this form, it's going to send that outgoing webhook, and I'll catch it with the request bin, and then we can go from there and paste that into the messaging framework wizard in Visual Studio. So I'm just going to put my own information in here. And I've just got a very simple form, basic information. It's summer, so I like water sports, and I'm going to click Submit. All right, so now that that's done, I should be able to go to my spreadsheet. I see that it's created a new row in the spreadsheet after I submitted that form. And then if all went well, the outgoing webhook should have gone out. And so if I refresh the request bin page, say that 10 times fast. You can see now that request bin has caught the outgoing webhook, and down at the bottom here of the screen I have the JSON that's contained in that webhook. So I'm just going to select that and copy it, and now I'll go back to Visual Studio. And I should mention that I did already install the messaging framework in my Visual Studio. That was just a matter of going to the dev portal and downloading a zip file that contains all of the SDK tools and then loading that into Visual Studio. So now what I'm going to do is start a new project in Visual Studio, and when I start the project I'm going to select this messaging framework template, and I'm going to give the project a name. I'll call it Google, if I can spell that right, Forms. And then when I click OK, that's going to launch it's going to create the project and launch the wizard that is going to help me to build this connector. And so I'm going to give it a description and a name. And I'm from Scribe, so I'm going to put the company name in there, and then it's very creative. Now you'll see that I do have the option of either JSON or XML for the data coming in. I know that this webhook uses JSON, so I've got that selected, but I do also have the option to do XML for that flexibility. Now I'll click Build Project, and it's going to create the files that I need to get this going. All right, so I'm going to open the models. I'm going to look at this item CS. And really, I learned how to do this by reading the documentation. So if you can follow directions, you can do this too. And all I'm going to do here is select this part of the code that defines the object that I'm expecting to receive in through the message map or through the connector. And then I'm going to go up to the Edit menu, and I'm going to use this Paste Special option where it says Paste as JSON classes, or Paste JSON as classes. So remember that I have the example JSON in my copy buffer that I got from the request bin. So now when I tell Visual Studio to paste the JSON as classes, it's going to translate that example into something specific. And I did go through this once before, and I do know that there's one thing that doesn't quite come through properly. So I'm going to look at what Visual Studio has underlined here for me, and I see that where it thought the field was a date time, Visual Studio doesn't understand that, so I need to change that to system.datetime, and it basically does that for me. So that was easy. Then I need to give the object a name. So when I'm working in Scribe Online, I want to know the name of the entity or object as it shows up in the map. And I'm just going to call it visitor because it's somebody who's visited my Granite State Outfitters newsletter request form and filled it out. So I'm going to call this visitor. And then there's one other thing that I need to do in filling this data out. So you see there are two tabs up here, item.cs and connector.cs. The wizard creates the code here and has the generic term item in here. You can see it's underlined because there's nothing in the item.cs that matches that. So what I need to do is change the name here from item to visitor. And you see that Visual Studio recognizes that as something that I have on the other screen. Okay, that is pretty much it as far as the coding that's involved here. So I'm just going to go ahead and save my project. And then all I really need to do is build it. So I go to the Build menu and I say Build Solution. And this is going to take all of about 2 seconds. You can see that the build succeeded, and now I've got my connector deployed, or it's got it built. So now what I need to do is deploy it. And I'm going to go into the project folder where Visual Studio is working, and I see that it's created a folder for this project. And if I open that folder and I drill in to it and I look, I believe it's in this folder, I see these are all the files that it created for me. and all I'm really going to do is copy these files into my Scribe Online connector directory. So I'm going to press pause here for just a minute. I said at the outset that the normal way of installing connectors is through the marketplace in Scribe Online, but there's also a I guess we used to refer to it as a sneaker net way of installing connectors within a specific organization. And the way that you do that is by copying these DLLs into the folder for the connector, or I'm sorry, for the agent. So I've got an agent installed on this machine, and you can see I've opened up the directory for the agent. There's a folder called connectors, and there it has another folder for each of the connectors that I have installed in my Scribe Online organization. Now, if I want to install a new connector, the first thing I need to do is stop my Scribe Online agent. So here I've got my services, my Windows Services screen, and all I'm going to do is right-click on that and stop the Scribe Online agent that I have running on this machine. Now that I've done that, I'm free to add a new connector. So I'm just going to create a new folder for it. And I'm going to call that scribe.connector.googleforms. And then if I open that folder, now all I really need to do is select all these files. And I know I don't actually, there's one that I don't really need, which is this Scribe Core Connector API DLL file. But I'm going to take everything else and I'm going to drop it into that new folder that I created for the connector. Okay, all those files are now there. And next I will go back to the services screen and start my agent again. And when I start the agent, it's going to discover that there's a new connector installed in that folder, and then it's going to tell the cloud that, hey, I want to register this new connector that is available to me now. Okay, so that's started again. Now, if everything worked as it should, when I go to Scribe Online, I will just sign out and back in just to make sure. But now that I've logged back into Scribe Online, that connector should be available in this organization. So as I was saying, I've got this agent installed on my machine that is an on-premise agent, and because I've put that new folder in there, when I go to the Connections window, and I click the plus button and look at the drop-down, there it is, the Google Forms connector that we just built.